Good afternoon, and thank you for that generous introduction. Let's do some business now. We're doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro. And just before, the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KABC, streaming live online worldwide at KABC.com. And yes, the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KABC.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks finishing higher again today with the S&P 500 and the Dow continuing to wow, eking out modest gains, good enough for new record highs. As the post-Fed rally continues, the post-Fed rate cut rally, that is, after the Fed cut the benchmark interest rate by half percentage point last week. We've seen the market gain steam. The Dow moving up 83.5 points today to settle at 42,208. The S&P 500 popping another 14 points higher to 5,733, a new closing high for that one. The Nasdaq near its record high, up 100 points today, ending at 18,074.5. Gold also at a record high, posting a fifth straight session of gains. Another record high today as the dollar continues to weaken following the Fed move last week. Gold moving up nearly $7 today to $2,683.60 an ounce. Silver also along for the ride, now above $32 an ounce. Crypto has been popping lately. We see a Bitcoin making a move on the upside, moving up about $1,200 now, back above $64,000. Yep, I hear the cheers in the background there for the crypto fans. Crypto companies, meanwhile, Trust Token and TrueCoin, now rebranded under the name Archblock, settling charges with the Securities and Exchange Commission today, according to MarketWatch. The SEC had accused the companies of conducting fraudulent and unregistered sales of investment contracts involving the stablecoin True USD, whose value is supposed to be pegged at 1-to-1 to the U.S. dollar. Exchange-traded funds tracking stocks in emerging markets also moving higher today. There was a big rally in Chinese stocks today following stimulus efforts from Beijing to pump up the world's second-largest economy. Oil also moving higher today, the first gain we've seen in 3 trading sessions, as a brighter demand outlook and rising risks to global supplies sent the oil prices moving up nearly 2%. The Chinese government's announcement of its biggest stimulus package since the pandemic, along with the threat of another hurricane in the Gulf Coast impacting oil production in the Gulf of Mexico and the sudden rise of geopolitical tension in the Middle East, all putting upward pressure on oil prices today. In fact, I'll discuss the latest in the Middle East this afternoon with Lisa DAFTARI, Middle East expert and editor of the Foreign Desk. LA-based home builder KB Home, based in Westwood, says that as mortgage rates dropped recently, it saw a strengthening in demand in August that it expects will carry into the rest of the year. Shares of KB Home moving down nearly $1 today to 87 and change. The markets moved higher today despite a drop in consumer confidence. Consumer confidence fell in the month of September to a 3-month low ahead of a big election coming up in November. Americans more concerned about the job market in light of a steady rise in unemployment and greater difficulty in finding work these days. A high cost of living after several years of severe inflation, also another source of concern. In fact, the Consumer Confidence Index moved lower this month by the most seen in 3 years as folks deal with high prices and an uncertain job picture now. Consumers most often mention high prices and inflation as factors influencing their current view of the economy. That, according to the report today put together by the Conference Board. Certainly rattling consumer confidence here in the Los Angeles area. Crime, especially retail crime, smash and grabs, and businesses being ransacked. As Ben Shapiro mentioned on his show just a few minutes ago, urban crime stats have soared. 50 juveniles ransacked a 7-Eleven in West Los Angeles last weekend on West Olympic Boulevard. Burglars broke into several businesses in Huntington Beach this week. We'll get the latest on crime. We'll have Dennis ZINE on the line. Dennis ZINE, the former L.A. City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, and current LAPD reserve officer with something like 56 years of amazing service to the City of Angels. The Honorable Dennis ZINE will be on the line later this hour. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, record-shattering day on Wall Street, and the whole works now. Joining us live, investment expert Jim HAUSBERG, managing director at Hightower Advisors, the HAUSBERG Group in Beverly Hills. Jim HAUSBERG, thanks for coming to the line on a banner day, another record-shattering day for the stock market.
It keeps going, Frank. You know, it's whenever we get some of these pullbacks based on some economic data, markets settle in and off we go. I mean, today we had this consumer confidence number coming well below expectations. As you so stated on, worries about the job market and inflation. Market was down a little bit and then rallied. Dow hitting a new high, or I don't know, the S&P 45th new high of the year. Nasdaq still down from its highs, but it's been good. And the bond market's traded very well since the Fed lowered last week. I did call the 50, if you recall, basis point move. I also said keep an eye on China, which had a good day today, but that's one day. So markets globally are doing well. Balanced portfolios are doing well. 50% stocks, 50 bonds. If you're just using the S&P and the Bloomberg Aggregate Bond Index, you're up double digits. And there's going to be correction. There's going to be pullbacks. Things are getting a little ahead of themselves, but it's been a good market, and we're going with it.
On there live with Jim HAUSBERG, with HAUSBERG Group in Beverly Hills, High Tower Advisors. And we see NVIDIA, of course, the Magnificent One. Still people talking about that one. It got a pop today, nearly $5 back to 120 and change. It seems like the Mag 7 had fallen out of favor for a while. Are they back, Jim? And what are your thoughts on NVIDIA and those big names?
I feel, as I just said a minute ago, those things they're great companies, and the numbers are spectacular. But they're expensive stocks, and I think in this environment where rates are going down, other industries are going to benefit, and I think we'll get investor dollars. Real estate-related companies, insurance companies, banks, and certain industrials will tend to do better in a lower interest rate environment, and so will the small cap stocks, which borrow money all the time, and now their rates are going to be lower. For the consumer, credit card issues, still very high rates, but will be lower. Mortgages will be coming down. Anybody who borrows money in the short term is going to benefit, and so will those industries. So I do still like the tech sector. Interesting enough, with markets hitting all-time highs here, in the quarter, the S&P Infotech Index is flat, and most other indices are up for the quarter. And yes, we have 8 days to go, but NVIDIA, clearly a winner in that space. That chip business they have going with AI is second to none. They've taken market share away from many companies, Intel being one, and that's obviously in the news for possible takeovers, but that's not a simple thing to work out. So NVIDIA is the leader. Stock is up 10x. It's just, down from its highs of 135, and then recently was down to 105, now 120. So clearly a leader in that space for the chips for AI.
Glad I asked you about that, Jim. Thank you for that. And of course, gold shining big time here now at a record high above, almost 2,700 now. Can you believe it? 2,683 and change today, up nearly $7. Silver above 32. We see the mining stocks taking off. Freeport McMoran, one of the big miners, up nearly $4 today at 48 and change. Hard to ignore gold hitting record highs here. Jim, give us your thoughts here on the precious metals and the mining stocks that rallied.
Yeah, there's obviously a demand for gold. In the past, when you have higher inflation, gold has always been that classic hedge. Obviously, inflation's come down, but it's obviously picked up quite a bit in the past couple of years. Central banks are buying gold. The value just keeps rising. Technically, it's in a great pattern. Clearly, poised for a pullback of some type because it's been almost straight up. But I'm still not a big fan of it. I wish I had owned it. I wish my clients had owned it. But it's made a huge move, and I think it's more of maybe now weakness in the dollar and, of course, the interest rate cut. So it's certainly a hot commodity, no pun intended, right now. How much to put into a portfolio is hard to say. I just, outside of jewelry, there's no real usage for gold, and it's a very tough one to make predictions on. But the trend is up, and very similar to Bitcoin too, which I still can't figure out. But both those, both the crypto and the hard asset plays like gold and silver are all trading up. So it's been interesting to watch.
Right, we got analog gold and so-called digital gold, crypto. I won't ask you to explain the crypto on the air this afternoon, but I'm sure I'm sure you're paying attention to it, right? Bitcoin up more than 1,200 right now, back above 64,000, getting closer to its all-time high. Hard to ignore these moves, and Ethereum, by the way, which had that ETF that started this year, now at 2,600 or so. What are you observing? Let's put it that way, with these ETFs and what's happening with these names.
there's a lot of retail investors, Frank, chasing this stuff. I hope it ends well for everybody, but it looks a little bubblish to me because I still can't figure out, the valuation and how crypto is used. You always hear it's used in the black market. It's used by bad guys around the world and, for all different sorts of smuggling techniques. I don't know. It's just something I don't know. I'm interested. I watch it. Ethereum as well, but maybe one day we'll understand why these valuations are where they are. But at the same time, you got to look at the volatility, Frank. And these things can move 10, 15, 20% down just as quickly as they move up. So be very cautious. Again, if someone can explain why it's going up outside the fact that it's being used more or there's a limited supply, I get that. But it's just a very, very difficult asset to invest in on behalf of my clients.
Probably the most plausible explanation I've heard is it goes up because it goes up and it goes down because it goes down.
Kind of what
thank
I
you for
would
your
say.
honesty. Thank you for your honesty. It's tough to get the proper analysis on that, and we certainly talk to the biggest fans here as well as the harshest critics, and we will continue to do that. On the Live with Jim HAUSBERG here now. And speaking of volatility, we saw volatility move up 3% today. Obviously, we're seeing gold move up. It's in addition to an inflation hedge, a geopolitical nervousness hedge, and certainly with what's happening in the Middle East, a lot of nervousness as well as in the oil markets, and another hurricane expected in the Gulf of Mexico, and we're watching what's happening with all that. Jim, oil and all this has moved up a bit now. Let's see, nearly at $72 a barrel, but off its high of the year certainly. What about oil in all this?
Yeah, well, the energy stocks, which I look at, have performed poorly. I mean, out of all the 11 different sectors of the S&P, energy is up 6% for the year, and down almost 2.8%, so to speak, for the quarter, and down for the month. I don't want to be too short term. Over the last 12 months, the energy stocks are down also. So with all that's happened, I mean, now you got a short term thing with the hurricane. There's certainly been a big slowdown in China. And they're big users of energy. So I think that still is the main reason, and probably a big supply. But with the fears in the Middle East, and hopefully that just doesn't turn into a bigger problem than it already is, and that there's actually a disruption in the supply, you probably see oil move up a lot more. But if you look at where oil is and you look at all the things that are going on around the globe, you wouldn't have guessed it'd be 72 based on that. So I just don't see it running up much. Not a huge fan of the energy companies, although they do pay dividends. It's been a weak performer this year, and unless the price of the commodity really takes off, I wouldn't expect much from the oil group.
All right, looking at the homepage of MarketWatch here, it says stock market indicator with a near perfect track record is flashing a buy signal. Where do you think this thing goes from here, Jim HAUSBERG, with the market here at or near all-time highs?
Well, I don't think we all of a sudden turn into a bear market. That just doesn't happen. And it seems like whenever markets do go through some sort of a correction, a couple of percent, which is expected. I mean, this thing has moved up a lot. We don't know what sort of shock is going to really, knock the market down. But I would expect, to see more volatility. You just pointed out the volatility's up. So there could be some global event. There could be some economic event. We got the Fed meeting in November, or, right after the election. They're probably going to lower rates by, I'd say, a quarter this time, and maybe another quarter in December, get the Fed funds down to 3.5%, I should say eventually 3.5%, probably more into the 4.25% range after the next two cuts, if that happens. If the economic data continues to be weak, that's why you're going to see the cuts. Can't say if we're going to see 50 or 25, but I would expect Fed funds, which are now right around 4.75, to be around 3.5 in a year from now. Markets could do well with that lower interest rate environment. But again, the earnings, Frank, which we haven't gotten into, is really why markets are where they are. And I'll give you an interesting statistic, and to all you listeners, if you go back 5 years, and just before the pandemic, interest rates, obviously during the pandemic, went down to zero as the Fed lowered rates. But since then, the S&P has gone from 2,800 up to 5,700, so it's basically doubled in 5 years. The earnings of the S&P are up a little over 50% in that same time period. So interest rates, going up as much as they did because of inflation, we still have had an incredible market. So I would think that if rates come down, which is expected, I would expect a good market. But again, the key is not so much the rates, it's going to be the earnings. And if the consumer continues to spend, I think we're in for, some good times. But the markets aren't cheap, Frank. We're at big multiples, especially in the tech sector. So I'd expect, some volatility around here. But as long as the earnings continue to grow over time, we're going to have a much higher market. I don't like to, just go out and say, hey, in 5 or 10 years from now. But that's what's worked. The Dow is, over 40,000. I remember when it was 1,000 back in the early 80s. So it's gone up 40x over this 40-year period of time. It's going to keep doing that, Frank. It's always going to keep pace with inflation and probably 3 to 4 points higher. So still bullish on the markets long term, but at all-time highs and at pretty big multiples, wouldn't be surprised to see a correction.
On there live with Jim HAUSBERG. Let me ask you the big question here now, Jim. Any other specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Yeah, we continue to like, and I've said this before, dividend-growing companies. Companies that are growing their dividends on an annual basis in excess of 15%. Microsoft is a great example of that, especially over the past several years. Companies that are increasing their dividends are the highest quality of companies, and they also continue to reinvest in their businesses, and that works well. Intuit's been a great stock, a big dividend grower. Broadcom, United Healthcare, Moody's, Cintas, the laundry supply company. These companies, a lot of people are not really familiar with, have grown those dividends. So if you look at the Vanguard Dividend Growth Fund, it's had a great return this year. I would continue to look at companies that are growing their dividends. Again, not high-paying dividend stocks, but dividend growers. I'd also look at Berkshire. I think on any weakness, that stock continues to do well. He's accumulated a ton of cash, 300, 400 billion. That's earning some money too, by the way. Money markets are still in the mid to high fours, but those rates will be coming down. So I continue to like that. As far as taking off the table, I would lighten up if you have to in the technology sector. I just think the run's been too big. Something like 40% in the NASDAQ over the last, 12 to 14 months. It's come down from its highs, but and they're still great companies, great balance sheets, incredible earnings power, but expensive stocks in general.
Terrific, Jim. Well, thank you very much for joining us live here. A record-shattering day for the Dow and the S&P 500. Big day on Wall Street. Big day for gold at a record high. Thanks for covering all the bases here. That is Jim HAUSBERG, investment expert, managing director at Hightower Advisors, the HAUSBERG Group in Beverly Hills. Always great to have you with us here, Jim. Thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon. My
pleasure to be with you, Frank. All the best.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. Likewise, Jim. And let's get right out to the freeways now on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues on 790 KABC. Good afternoon. Record-shattering day for stocks again today. The Dow up 83.5 points, settling at 42,208. S&P 500 of 14 at 5,733. Both of those major averages at all-time highs. The NASDAQ near its all-time high, up 100 points today at 18,075. The yield in the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates out there now, 3.73%. Gold at a record high, up nearly $7 now at $2,683.60 an ounce. Crude oil futures moving up today, right now hovering at $71.55 a barrel. Among the winners today, we see shares of Freeport-McMoRan. That's one of the gold miners. The stock moved up $3.58 today at $48.72. NVIDIA, the so-called Magnificent One and the leader of the Mag 7, moving up $4.61 at $120.87. Berkshire Hathaway Class B shares pulling back 42 cents to $454 and change. The Class A shares, that's Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, the most expensive stock on the New York Stock Exchange, never split. So today it moved back nearly $1,400 to $683,913. Also in the winning column today, Las Vegas Sands shares moving up nearly, more than $2, $2.25 to $44.38. We see Boeing down 49 cents at $155.81. Turning to the cryptos now, Bitcoin up about 1,200 at 64,500. Ethereum up 14 at 26.65, and Doge at the moment at 11 cents. And now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Turning to crime now here in Los Angeles and indeed nationwide. Interesting headline in the Wall Street Journal. It says, contrary to media myth, U.S. urban crime rates are up. The FBI's flawed statistics, the article notes, hide the disturbing results of the defund the police movement since 2020, noting left-leaning commentators and advocates have insisted over the past year the crime rates are falling. ABC's David Muir asserted so while rebutting Donald Trump during the recent presidential debate. The nation's largest crime survey says otherwise, according to the Journal. Crime rates have not been falling, and urban crime is far worse than it was in the pre-George Floyd era. The new findings released this month by the National Crime Victimization Survey. Meanwhile, another report released by the FBI this week notes a decline in both violent crime and property crime last year. So conflicting news officially on the crime numbers out there. In the meantime, we're seeing what's happening here in Los Angeles, smash and grabs, businesses being ransacked. We saw 50 juveniles ransacking a 7-Eleven in West Los Angeles last weekend on West Olympic Boulevard. Burglars breaking into several businesses in Huntington Beach. Let's bring in Dennis Zine now. The Honorable Dennis Zine, former LA City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, and current LAPD reserve officer with about 56 years of service at last count. Amazing service to the City of Angels. Dennis Zine is on the line. Thank you very much, Dennis, for coming to the line this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. It's always a pleasure to be with you and the wonderful listeners of KBC.
Wonderful to have you with us. Your reaction, sir? Yes.
Well, crime is continuing, whatever numbers they want to show. The bottom line is many people are crime victims. They fail to report a crime. The way they assess crime, the way they tabulate is crime reports. A crime report has to have a DR number, a reference number. And if it doesn't have a reference number, it doesn't exist. So many people are victims of crimes, and they tell me, why to make a report? They're not going to arrest the person. It was just a minor theft or whatever. They broke my window of my car. They stole my car, whatever. You got to report every single crime. That's how they judge it on a local, state, national level. So when people do not report the shoplift or whatever happens, someone steals a bicycle out of your garage. If you don't report those crimes, they're not listed. They don't count. So people need to understand, however petty you think it is, make a report. You can make a report online. But one of the big problems is you give these crime statistics and we look at the numbers and they say, well, that's up, it's down. Well, how many people are giving up and not even making crime reports anymore? They just have no confidence in the system. That's one of the huge problems. So when you look at the numbers they're telling you, how accurate are those numbers? I will tell you an accurate number right now is 8,780 LA police officers. 8,780. Everyone from the chief of police to the recruit in the academy, people on vacation and training, detectives, etc. 8,780 policing the entire city of Los Angeles. Absolutely understaffed to do the job of protecting and serving the good people and the businesses of the city of Los Angeles. That's the huge problem we have to deal with. We can't get officers to join not only LAPD, but the sheriffs, the highway patrol, local agencies. So one of the first issues is you got to fill the ranks. Then secondly, take those reports. And if you don't want to go to the police station, because all the stations, most of them are closed in the evening hours, so you only have daylight hours, you can report online. You can go lap.com, go online, report. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is for people to make a crime report, whatever the crime is, petty theft, grand theft, embezzlement, whatever the case may be, make a police report. Otherwise, the statistics don't show there were crimes in those particular categories. And believe me, Frank, there's a number of categories that I look at the statistics and I say there's got to be more crimes than what's being reported. But again, it's all by the ones that are documented with a DR number. And if it's not there, it doesn't exist. So how you can clean the crimes, don't make reports, crime goes down. Real simple.
On the line with Dennis Zine, the Honorable Dennis Zine, former LA City Council member and longtime LAPD sergeant, current reserve officer. Look what happened just recently. Of course, you're speaking to the business audience here, and we focus on business crime here when we have these conversations. About 50 juveniles ransacking a 7-Eleven in West Los Angeles last weekend on West Olympic Boulevard, and haven't heard of any arrests in that situation. This is happening more often. What's your reaction to this latest video?
It's become the latest trend. You know, the street racing, doing the donuts in the middle of the street where the governor signs this legislation is going to really do absolutely no good because police officers already been able to impound cars. So he wants to wave the flag that he's doing something. The governor's done basically nothing to help law enforcement do the job, protect people. But smash and grabs are a continuing problem. And they're getting younger and younger. These folks are coming in riding their bicycles. Riding their bicycles they got for a celebration. They're going to the local 7-Eleven and looting the store. I mean, this has become a trend. all over Los Angeles. And how are you going to make a crime report? You're going to make a crime report. You have multiple suspects. They're stealing everything from candy to alcohol. This is a growing trend. It never used to happen. I know that certain department stores, major department stores, do not call the police when shoplifting takes place. They just let that item out the door. They don't even try to stop the people. So when you talk about crime, it's escalating. It's not going down. So if you don't have those crime reports, and some businesses say, why waste our time? Why make a crime report? Nothing's going to happen. The courts are jammed. It's really a broken down system, Frank, and it's really sad. I feel bad for these people who try to earn a living, who try to run a business, and whether it's kids on bicycles or adults or whatever the case may be, crime has just become a way of life in Los Angeles, and it's very, very sad to see it continue, and we don't have the resources to really address it properly and bring it to an end. Interesting. I rode the Red Line today, the Red Line transit from North Hollywood to downtown with two of my friends. We went to Filippi's for lunch. We saw a bunch of security people doing absolutely nothing, and we saw violations, and the security people did nothing. They're just standing around. There's one man on this train who's selling chips to people. You can't sell on the train, and there's two security people there doing absolutely nothing. I'm looking at this saying security on MTA is a total joke. People who ride the MTA take your life in your hands. We know we've had a number of people killed on the Metro. I think 79 people were murdered in 2023. So, Frank, a lot of problems, not only in the transit, but in the retail trade. And the governor, as you see, coming to this legislative session ending, he's going to be signing all these bills. They're going to get publicity about this and that. But believe me, it's not a safe place, and it should be a lot safer, and it used to be a lot safer. But that safety is seemingly, it's diminished. It really has.
The Honorable Dennis Zine on the line live with us here. What is it going to take to turn this around? Obviously, voters will be making some important decisions coming up here in November.
Well, they will make decisions, and hopefully those decisions will create an environment of public safety and of prosperity. But like in school, teachers can no longer suspend a student from school. So the teachers are now powerless. They can't suspend a student from school for whatever conduct they're involved in. I mean, we've really had a breakdown. And I don't blame the residents, the mothers and the fathers. I blame the political system we have in place. And I don't care about whether you're a Democrat or Republican. We need a system to protect everyone and support everyone. It's not working. It's absolutely falling apart. And now you got world wars breaking out. I mean, huge wars breaking out. What's that going to do to our military personnel and the families? So we have so many. I don't want to talk about gloom and doom, but the reality is, Frank, I don't have anything positive to talk about except reality, and reality is not very positive. So when we see the legislative session end and the governor signs these bills, oh, we got this, we got that, you're not any safer than you were before they were breaking in your house while you're watching television.
On the air live with Dennis Zine, laying on thick today, and keep telling it like it is, Dennis Zine. And we got these propositions on the ballot, basically the repeal of Prop 47, right? And then,
Right.
Of course, the DA's race is going to be significant as well. What are your thoughts on those big items?
Well, we need to change those propositions to go back to reality when it comes to holding people responsible for criminal activity. And as far as the DA's race, I mean, I was a member of the recall campaign. If Gascon gets reelected, I would tell you candidly, it's time to move out of California, and particularly Los Angeles County, if he gets reelected. I mean, you had the chief enforcement officer on the Metro who was terminated, and you've got the Metro falling apart as far as security. You've got the DA who doesn't want to prosecute. And we've got a serious situation. People can't get insurance on their homes. They can't get insurance on their cars. You want to get insurance, now you have to put a new roof on your house, new plumbing. I mean, it's really, California's going nuts. But it's not the people, it's not the taxpayers, it's the people we're electing to office that have no focus on what they need to do to make our lives tranquil, peaceful, and productive. And that's who I point the finger at, the elected officials, not ma and pa that's out there working every day, taking care of their kids. It's the elected officials that have turned this city upside down and this state upside down. They're the people who are doing it. They got a potential recall going against a council member, Yoslowski. A recall. She's a new council member. They always want to get her out of office. We have serious situations in Los Angeles and in the state of California, and God help the voters when it comes up to November.
The Honorable Dennis Zine, live with us here today, former Los Angeles LA City Council member, former LAPD sergeant, current LAPD reserve officer, 56 years of service, amazing service to the City of Angels. Dennis ZINE, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank, and good luck to our listeners.
Thank you very, very much. And right out to the freeways we go now here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. More U.S. military moves in the Middle East as tensions there rise. The U.S. reported to be sending a number of additional troops now in the Middle East in response to the sharp spike in violence between Israel and Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces in Lebanon that's raised the risk of a greater regional war. The Pentagon press secretary wouldn't say exactly how many more U.S. forces would be deployed or what they would be asked to do there. Right now, the U.S. has about 40,000 troops in the region. This week, the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, 2 Navy destroyers and a cruiser set sail from Virginia, heading to the 6th Fleet area in Europe on a regularly scheduled deployment. The ship's departure opens up the possibility that the U.S. could keep both the Truman as well as the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, which is in the Arabian Gulf, in the region in case more violence breaks out. All of this following a report that said Hezbollah asked its Iranian proxies or Iranian patrons, that is, to attack Israel as the Israel Defense Forces increased pressure on the Lebanese terror group over the past week. But so far, Tehran has rebuffed the request, according to an Axios report. This as Iran's president addressed the UN General Assembly. Following all these developments very closely is Lisa DAFTARI, Middle East expert and editor of the Foreign Desk. Lisa, thank you very much for taking the call and give us your reaction and the very latest news there, please.
Thank you for having me. It looks like this is the escalation that we've been waiting for. I mean, for those who are blaming the escalation on the pagers and the walkie-talkie attack by the IDF last week, well, this escalation started for some on October 8th when Hezbollah was already firing missiles into Israel, trying to provoke some sort of trickle into a larger conflict, which we have seen now. So up to now, Israel has tried to restrain itself, and at the request of the White House, more than anything else, has held back from entering this new front. As we know, Israel fighting multiple fronts in this war, including fighting Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as well as the Houthis, as well as, of course, threats directly coming from the Islamic Republic and now from Hezbollah as well. You know, what we're watching is a little bit of a game of chicken. This is not what we anticipated, but perhaps the unanticipated pager and walkie-talkie attack set the stage, really causing a psychological war and causing a lot of intimidation against Hezbollah fighters. In the last few days alone, 500 Hezbollah fighters have been eliminated by Israel. In total, from October 7th till now, almost 1 year, we haven't seen that kind of number. So it's amazing to see what Israel can do when they are not restrained, when they're fighting a very precise and pinpointed attack against terrorists, when they can be, really careful and cautious and very much respectful of civilian territory, where we've seen in Lebanon, and that has been the reports from war experts and others. So, we're watching here, and I know the United States is hoping that they can really talk Israel out of the escalation and they can, kind of control the situation at this point. But at the same time, sending in reinforcements, I think, is a good idea by the Biden administration to be there just in case.
Hezbollah today confirming the death of one of its top commanders who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in a southern Beirut suburb, and he's been taken out, and others have too. What we heard from the Iranian leader today in New York at the United Nations. What's your reaction to these latest developments?
There have been a couple of Hezbollah operatives that were eliminated in the last few days by Israel that have been on the U.S. Terror list. There was a bounty on one of their heads that was $7 million for being involved in a Marines attack in the 80s against the United States. And yet, again, Israel able to find them and eliminate them. It's really disheartening to see the United States show some daylight. I know there are two different stories here. There is what Israel, and the United States are doing behind the scenes, and then there is the public appearance of what their relationship is. And the fact that the United States under this administration has chosen to show some daylight between themselves and Israel, to show that they are trying to play both sides and say there are, of course, casualties on both sides, and we all agree on that, but there is not two sides to this war. We're talking about terrorists on one side, and we see a sovereign nation, our democratic ally Israel, on the other. And the sooner that we can be on the same page about this, we can be sharing intel, for example, and Israel could help the United States eliminate many of the terrorists that are on the most wanted list. So, I don't think that Israel got a thank you from the United States for eliminating a terrorist that we have been seeking out. But I think that, and many others have said this, but what Israel is doing is fighting a war for all of us, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hamas or Hezbollah or the Islamic Republic in Iran. They want us all dead. This is a war against the West. This is a war against anybody who stands for freedom. This is a war for anybody who won't fold under the flag of terrorism, including moderate Muslims who have stood up in the Middle East, and Abraham's being a testament to that. So, it's a lot going on right now, and it's moving very rapidly, but we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, and so much has happened since then. And the most unfortunate part of all this, Frank, as you know, is the propaganda war that has really seeped its way and penetrated so deeply into our society here, whether it's at our universities or in the news or, wherever you look. There is such a misinformation campaign. And again, the Islamic Republic and Hamas and Hezbollah being behind that. But I encourage everybody to really understand the nuances of these wars and to really prepare ourselves for, God forbid, another 9/11 type of attack here, and that we should stand behind those who are fighting against terrorism anywhere in the world.
Lisa DAFTARI, Middle East expert, editor of the Foreign Desk. We'll continue to follow you closely on social media as well, and hope to speak with you again soon as we follow all of these developments. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us live here. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and tune in again tomorrow at 4 here on Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
The Rolling Stone Music Now podcast gets inside the biggest stories with Rolling Stone senior writer Brian Hyatt.
Guitarist Steve Howe of Yes on the making of Fragile, the birth of Prague.
I was trying to think about playing the guitar without any blues cliches. The golden rule on the Yes album is there would be no do-do-do-do-do-do.
And that was what ended up making it quote-unquote progressive, is if you ignore cliches, then you're headed forward.
That's right.
Rolling Stone Music Now, wherever you listen.